On today's show, our good friend Sam Nestler joins us to talk about the Scott Wedgewood extension, talk about some potential trade and free agent targets that could make sense for the Stars, and then we talk a little bit about prospects that could make their Stars debut this season and the NHL draft, all coming up on a loaded Friday episode of Locked On Stars.
You're Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey, credentialed member of the Dallas Stars media, coming to you on this Friday, July 1st. Happy July, everybody. Hope you are having a great day and a great start to your 4th of July weekend. And whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener, thank you for stopping by today's episode and for making Locked On Stars your first listen every single day. Be sure to subscribe to our show on YouTube as well as on your favorite podcasting platform. We are free and available no matter where or how you listen, and you can find and follow me on Twitter at Dane_Lewis and our show as well at Locked On Stars. But let's not hesitate any longer. Let's get into today's episode where I was joined by Dallas Stars writer Sam Nestler. All right, everybody, I'm glad to now bring onto the show recurring guest, friend of the show, Sam Nestler, who writes about and covers the Dallas Stars just about as well as anybody else. And Sam, right before we sat down and started recording, we had a list of things we wanted to talk about, and then news breaks here a little after 4:30 on Thursday that Scott Wedgewood is staying in Dallas for at least 2 more seasons, inking that new deal with the Dallas Stars worth $2 million, so getting $1 million per season. And now that we're about 20 minutes removed from that news, what are your initial thoughts on that deal?
Yeah, I love it. I think Scott was such a great ad for them. Not only his performance, I mean, he didn't play a ton. He played in 8 games, something like that. But he had pretty good numbers. He obviously had that crazy game against Carolina to start his Dallas career. But he's just such a good guy off the ice. And I think he's really good for Oettinger to I can't call him really a veteran because he hasn't really established himself either. So he's going to be hungry to battle, which will be really good for Oettinger to have a guy because, you don't want Oettinger to get too comfortable as much as you want him to be comfortable and be the guy. It's nice to have that kind of battle going on. They're friends. They got along great right away. And he's just a great guy with a great story that I think will bring a lot to the team. On top of the fact that they got him for $1 million a year, which is barely anything. And then now they have three guys in kind of the lineup with Hudobin getting ready to be back in the fall. So it's just good, gives them some security, which they needed. I don't think anyone wanted them to go in with Hudobin as their backup, as their only option with his injuries and poor play last season. So I love it all around.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm almost shocked just at the amount of the deal. I think that maybe he could have played himself into a little bit more money with how he played with Dallas. But yeah, like you said, certainly glad to have a guy like Wedgwood who's been around this league for a little bit of an older guy who still has a lot left in the tank, as we saw at the end of last season, but can come in for Jake Oettinger when, he needs a night off or, heaven forbid he gets injured. So I think that Dallas could really be looking to having one of the better, more underrated goalie tandems this coming season if both guys still play to the level that they did last season, and a lot of other things to kind of get caught up on. The Dallas Stars do have a new head coach, which I know has been covered at length for the past week and a half or so now. But what were some of your initial thoughts whenever the Pete DeBoer news broke? Were you kind of expecting it? Were you thinking maybe one of the other big candidates would come to Dallas? What have been your overall thoughts on this hire for the Stars?
Yeah, I think the original thought for most people, whether it's fans or people around the media around the team, is you kind of take a second and you're like, all right, was this the safe hire? Was this, for Nil to make sure he didn't have another Montgomery mistake or whatever it is? But then once you kind of read into it a little bit and see he's been successful everywhere he's gone. So, he's taken teams to the Stanley Cup twice in the first year. He's been to the conference final. I think it's 5 times total over the last 8 seasons, something like that. And he's had a really good history of developing younger players into very high level players. So it's almost like the perfect scenario. And then when he came in and had his introductory press conference, he started talking about getting more out of Miro, bringing more offense from the back end, bringing more offense overall, and developing some of those guys, maybe like a Gurianov or someone who could use this change. So I really like it. I think that the team is excited. I think everyone seems excited. And I think after that first day of his interviews and everything, I think it just solidified that he's the right fit right now. I think the worry for some people is that the Stars got a win now coach when they're not in a win now scenario. But I don't agree with that. I really think that maybe they're not like, this is the year and that's it kind of scenario. But I don't think the Stars are I think they're trying everything they can to avoid a rebuild scenario, whether even if it's just a mini rebuild. So I think that he's the perfect fit for them. And I think he has the potential to bring out a lot of the things that the Stars have been lacking.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I know it was mentioned in his introductory press conference that even, Joe Pavelski played such a vital role in this hire, just with their former connection. Pavelski, the captain of many of those San Jose Sharks teams back when DeBoer was in San Jose. So I think that he could even bring a lot out of that top line, as weird as that sounds. It seems like they've already, produced quite a bit, but I think it could be really interesting to see how that trio of Robertson, Hintz, and Pavelski could potentially take that next step and be even more elite than they were this past season. And you touched on it a little bit with Miro Heiskanen, but just initially kind of off your off the bat, I guess, of this hire, who are some other guys you think that could thrive or maybe increase some of their production in Pete DeBoer's system, that maybe just bringing in this new coach could maybe light a spark, whether it's offense or defense or maybe another aspect of their game?
Yeah, Miro again is, I think, the top one, just because we know what he can do. We saw in 2020, Rick Bowness and his staff said, defense, you guys need to get up in the rush. We need to score more goals in the back end. And Miro was dominant. I think he had 26 points in 27 games. Klingberg dominated as well. Alexiak had a ton of goals. So like the whole back end was really good. That's basically what DeBoer does. He brings the defense to lead the rush. He gets tons of shots in the blue line. I think his teams have been in the top 10 in shots, either shots total and shots and goals by defensemen, like every year for his last 8 seasons. So Miro is going to be a huge one. Klingberg, if he stays, will also benefit from that as well. But then Gurianov is the one that I really keep putting my finger on, because everybody's talked about Gurianov all year and last year. We've seen what he can do. Clearly, a little bit of a Val Nichushkin type vibe I'm seeing, where he's lost the confidence. I'm sure he didn't get along very well with Bowness. We didn't see what went on behind the scenes, but that's just kind of the feeling. So maybe he comes in and DeBoer treats him as a young player, because he is. He's 24, 25 at the most. Maybe he just treats him as like, this is your first, let's say this is your second year after your big 20-goal year. What are you going to do? And here's how you can do it. And maybe that fresh start will be something big for him. And other guys like Jacob Peterson that are Kivi Ranta, those guys that are either right on the line or have shown a little bit, but not quite enough, could really benefit from the change of scenery and some more push towards developing offensively.
Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline.net, where the game starts. Yeah, certainly. I think Denis Gurianov could especially benefit from a big season, and I think the Stars are for sure giving him that chance with the new extension that he signed recently. And like you said, you hit it right on the head that he has shown the potential. I mean, he can skate with just about anybody in this league and showed some really great flashes. But yeah, I think he was maybe held back by what seemed like a rocky relationship with Coach Bowness. So I think it'll be, nice, and there should be a lot of optimism, I think, surrounding that. And Joel Kiviranta as well. I think he's a guy that I continue to overlook whenever kind of thinking about what the roster could look like next season. I mean, this is a guy that, played hero in the postseason not too long ago and has kind of faded into irrelevancy amongst Stars fans as of late. So who knows if this new hire, and of course it's going to depend on, I think, what other coaches that DeBoer brings on to his staff, because I think right now he still only has the goalie coach and the video coach, so he has to kind of bring in and round out the rest of his staff, which I think will play a huge role in the development of some of those guys as well. And you touch on John Klingberg, and that kind of takes me to the next talking point, free agency, which is going to be starting here in the next few weeks. Obviously, we have guys like John Klingberg, who we don't know if he's going to stay in Dallas or if he will, be wearing a different team sweater at the start of the year. With John Klingberg, who are maybe some other guys on this Stars team that you could see either, re-signing or coming back? Who do you think leaves, and who do you think stays with the Stars? Because you have guys like Michael Raffel, who I know, I think there's been, I think Jim Nill even said that they offered him a deal and they haven't heard back yet. Jason Robertson, I feel like, is a pretty easy answer, but he's a free agent. Who are some of the guys that you could see leaving and staying here with the Stars?
Robertson and Oettinger are going to resign. We don't know whether it's going to be the big 8-7 year deal or they're going to do some type of bridge to save some money. But they're no brainers, obviously. Klingberg we could get into that for 2 hours about why he would stay, why he wouldn't. I think they're going to still do whatever they can. Because looking at the free agent market, there's no replacement for him. It's not like they lose him and sign someone that's just a little less, a little below him for way less money. It's just not going to be like that. So they'll do everything they can with him. The other guys that are really interesting, Raffel, I think, stays. I think they find a way. They just going to have to offer him a little bit more. But I know he said the offer was too low, the original one. So I'm assuming they probably offered him something similar to what he was on before. And he thinks he earned it, which I think he did. They're probably the best player in the first round of the playoffs. The other guys that are interesting to me are Nemestikov, Radek Faksa, and Marian Studenic. Let's start with, Faksa is like a big question mark. I feel like I know the least about what his future holds because you talk to one person and they're like, oh, he's elite. He dominates the faceoff. He's a great penalty killer. He's, one of our better two-way forwards. And then you talk to someone else and he's like, oh, he's struggling. If you look at his numbers, he's way below what he should be expected offense, and his defense is bad. He was minus this season. So it's like, I don't really know which way to go with it. I mean, he's supposed to be their guy. He was supposed to be their future Patrice Bergeron third line, obviously not the offensive side, but the defensive part of Bergeron, the dominate the faceoff circle, always be on the penalty kill. And I just don't know where to go with that. So he's one that not necessarily would go. He's not a free agent, but he was someone who's been talked into trade rumors. So maybe that's a three-team thing this summer or whatever it is. So he's kind of like a little asterisk in the back of my mind that I'm curious about. Nemestikov is another one that he earned himself a spot on the roster. He came in, a lot of people complained he didn't score a lot, but he didn't come in to score a lot. He was brought in to solidify the forward group, bring a little bit to maybe a top six line, but mostly be in the bottom six, be a two-way guy. He added a couple goals in the playoffs. I love his gritty kind of, has a little attitude to him. So I love his game, and he controls the puck a lot, which the Stars need. But then you start asking, well, what if Wyatt Johnston or Maverick Bourque or Stankoven makes the team? How do you argue to keep this guy when their potential ceiling is obviously way higher and unknown? So it's a lot of question marks. I think that if they don't bring in somebody who's a little more offensive, he'll stay. If they do find someone in free agency that's a little bit cheaper, not cheaper, but a little bit more offensive and not much more money, I think that he might go somewhere else where he can really stick to his role, because the last thing you want is for him to be bouncing around lines and not have a role. We've seen that in the Dallas. Just look at Jamie Benn, who can't seem to find what line to be on. So I think that's a big question mark. And then the last one for me is Studenic. So I love Studenic this year. He didn't score a ton of goals, but he just, every time he played, he was all over the place. He was in every puck battle. He was high energy. He was producing chances, even if he wasn't converting. And people kept asking, like, what made the Devils waive him? Like, are we missing something here that he doesn't have? So he's an interesting one because you could get him back for super cheap. but it goes with the same question. Like, we know generally what his ceiling is. It seems to be that role. So does he get a spot over a possible free agent or a young guy that's right on the line, even like a Jacob Peterson that's finding himself in that role? So those are the guys that are really big in my head as question marks going forward.
Yeah, it's primarily on the offensive side outside of John Klingberg, who, yeah, I agree. I think that you could make a case that he's maybe the premier defenseman on the free agent market this summer. Not a whole lot of other big names to go out there and go get better on the blue line. This is a much more offensive focused or forward focused free agency class. And yeah, a lot of questions to answer, especially with some guys that could be playing middle 6 minutes. And even though it can be easy to overlook those guys, certainly important decisions. I think Raffle might have been the best free agent pickup from last summer. And like you said, one of the best players in the playoffs. And I think Nemestikov brings a lot to the table as well. I wasn't expecting that pickup at the trade deadline, but I think the Stars were better for it. And I think he could, for the people that complain about the lack of scoring, he was having to come into a new team, a new city, new coach, and get adapted to that system. I think, with the full training camp and offseason under Pete DeBoer, that he could be set up a little bit more for success. But kind of flipping the question on its head, talking about free agency, you say that some guys for the Stars could walk, some guys could get traded, and that opens up a few roster spots. So who are some guys that you think could be a good fit, that even if they don't necessarily make sense financially, all that could be worked out later? Who are some guys that you would potentially want to see in a Stars sweater at the start of the season?
Yeah, and the financial side is funny because we all thought that Stars are going to be so close to the cap and they're going to have so much issue. Now all of a sudden they're dropping Bishop's contract, and maybe Hudobin's, can figure out something, and they might clear some space and make some room for some bigger names. So I kind of have a mix of some of the higher end guys versus the more affordable ones. But if Klingberg goes, it's hard for me not to think they look for a defenseman, even if it's a $2 million a year defenseman that could be a solidifying. It's hard to think they just tossed Thomas Harley into their top four after he played very little last year. And they don't really have anyone else to fill that top four. I don't think Hakanpää is a top four guy consistently. So defensively, it's a really big question mark on whether or not Klingberg or not. But for them, it's not a big market. It's a lot of weird names, like Jan Ruda and guys that you don't want to get someone who's 36, like, Alexander Edler. They've already done that with Suter, and hit or miss, it's kind of hasn't worked out to what people think. They don't need any more older guys on the back end. So maybe someone that's a 27-year-old, can produce a little offense here and there. But I think the big thing for me is they need a scorer. And part of me thinks maybe trust that those Johnston guys, I want to keep bringing them up because they're not just prospects. Let's be honest. They are elite and the potential to be immediately NHL producers. So the good news with that is that a lot of them can come in and play. I think it's up to 9 games to start the year before they go back to junior. So maybe the Stars don't add anyone this summer and they trust and see if one of those guys can do that. And then once the season starts, if that doesn't happen, they sign somebody. But the names that I kind of have that I was looking at, you obviously look at the big ones. Philip Forsberg is probably one of the best forwards on the market. I love him. I love what he does. Super skilled, which the Stars haven't had since Sagan and Ben were dominant back in the day. So he's a really good one. He's projected, he's about $6 million, but I think he's projected to make even more if he moves up. So Riley Smith is another guy that's also in the $6 million, has scored goals everywhere he goes, especially in Vegas, but he seems to be the odd man out for Vegas, re-signing him this year. So those are the guys that are a little more pricey. Right below that is Andre Palat, which would be really cool. Has been 2-time Stanley Cup champion, was a part of their top line for most of that, and just scores goals, creates plays. He's around $5 million, but he might get a little bit more as well. And then one really big wild card, I don't know if they're going to re-sign him because I don't think they have the space, but Andrew Kopp from New York. He was the best free agent ad across the board, I think, this season. Dominated in the playoffs for them, had a ton of goals. He only makes $3.6 million. Now, he probably earned a little bit of a raise, but you can't imagine that small of a window earns him a huge raise because they don't know whether that's a one-time thing. So if he's around $4 million, that's something that is possible. That's something that he might sign for 3 or 4 years, maybe. So a shorter term. But man, he would bring so much to them because he's like the Nemestikov, but with more offense. He's a great two-way, can do a whole lot of things, but he scores more than Nemestikov does. So that would definitely be an upgrade. And then you also have the guys that were mentioned when the trade deadline was around, which was the Chandler Stevensons, the Andre Burakovsky, Andreas Athanasiou, those other guys that might not be the big, huge firework, deals, but maybe add a little bit more offense, because it's hard for me to see Jim Nill standing pat again after 2 or 3 years of doing so and kind of regretting it. It feels like they need someone who can score goals.
Today's episode of Locked On Stars is also brought to you by our friends at Built Bar. From the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You've probably tried the amazing Coconut Brownie Chunk Built Bar, but guess what? Your friends at Built have given Coconut Brownie Chunk the Puffs treatment. That's right, the Coconut Brownie Chunk Built Bar flavor you love in a delicious, chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. Coconut Brownie Chunk Puffs are only here for a limited time, so go to Built.com right now to make sure you don't miss out, because they're going fast and they taste amazing. And the best part about Built Puffs is, of course, that amazing flavor, but you can enjoy them guilt-free because they are actually good for you. They are the perfect treat, perfect when you've got a craving and when you need to satisfy that sweet tooth. Or if you need a quick, healthy snack, they are an excellent source of protein. Go to Built.com right now and use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Again, use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off your order at Built.com. Yeah, absolutely. And Andrew Kopp's even a guy that, I kind of secretly wanted to come to the Stars at the deadline. I didn't think it was possible just because it seemed like he was going to go to a true contender, and New York made it to the conference finals. So it makes a lot more sense that he went there. But yeah, if the Stars could pick up a guy like him, that I think that would be incredible for the offense. But, there's also, like you said, that aspect of, do they trust some of these up and coming prospects to come in and make an impact? Because if those guys like the Borks and Stankovens and Johnstons of the world can come in with their, I think all of them are still on entry-level deals, so they're not making that much money. I think that could be huge for the Stars, because they could get, a potentially really good season, really nice production on offense for not as much money. And then maybe, in the next offseason when Joe Pavelski likely retires or goes somewhere else after his contract ends, maybe then you can go out and get a really big forward to replace him. I think the possibilities are seemingly endless in this situation. And, you mentioned Andre Palat. I think that he could be a fun ad. And I was even looking earlier today at some other people that could be, nice additions to this team. And this one would have to come through trade, but I kind of want to get your thoughts on this one. I saw someone speculate that Alex Killorn from the Tampa Bay Lightning could be on the move this summer. I think he has 1 year left on his deal, about $4.4 million. 32 years old, scored 25 goals for the Lightning last season. Can play that left wing position. I think he could maybe fit in really nice on a second line with Tyler Seguin, or maybe even if he needed to play in the bottom six, he could as well. What would your thoughts be on a guy like Killorn, who, similar to Palat, has been with the Lightning for those cup runs and just been a nice piece of their core?
Yeah, he's similar. I think he's a little less skilled than Palat, but he scores a lot. He scores goals. So is he Russian?
I'm not sure, actually.
I'm not sure, because I was going to say that would be a nice Gurionov, Sagan, Killorn second line.
Yeah,
they could have some chemistry. But yeah, he would be a great fit as well. And I'm actually surprised he doesn't make more. But he's the same type of ad as Nemestikov. Again, I keep going back to him because that's the type of player you want. But the Stars specifically need a little more offense, and he does that. I mean, you said he scored 25 goals. He's been a guy that I think he's produced a lot in the playoffs as well for them, and I think that would be really cool for them to have just someone who's won it. I mean, they have two guys. If Holtby leaves, I think one guy that's won the Stanley Cup on their entire roster. So that's beneficial. And the Stars always talk about they have tons of veteran leadership, but they don't have the veteran leadership that's done it. They have the veteran leadership that's lost it a couple times or lost at the conference finals. But the more you can get that have won cups, and 2 in a row especially, would be huge. I love that.
Yeah, I think, that's one of the nice parts about the offseason, especially right before free agency, is you can, kind of speculate and, be hopeful that your team can go out and get that big piece. And trades can really happen, at any moment. We've already seen Kevin Fiala get sent to Los Angeles from Minnesota. I certainly think that makes the Kings a lot better, and I think that they could have a really nice season if they continue to add. So that's what always makes the NHL offseason, somewhat still entertaining. I think people might think that because hockey's over that we can't still have fun, but it is of course fun to speculate. So and Kluan, I looked it up. He was born in Canada, so not sure if there's any Russian relation there, but was born in Canada. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe he has some sort of connection to Russia there, but maybe we're hoping we can get that Radulov replacement as well with his departure from the team. But going back to some of those prospects, especially the big three that we've been touching on, are there any of those three that you can see making the roster and making an immediate impact on the team? And if so, who do you think it is?
Yeah, all three of them have the potential. I will say that. Watching how they play, I actually think Bork might be the best possibility because I think he's the biggest playmaker. Wyatt Johnston and Logan Stankoven can obviously score a ton of goals and they can make plays. There's no doubt about it. But I think, again, Stankoven is more of a two-way guy. He scored a lot of goals, but he scored a lot of goals in juniors. I don't think he does that at the NHL level. I think he can score, but I think he brings that grit. I think he talks about Brad Marchand being the kind of player he wants to be. So he has that upside, but I think Bork has really the potential to do it. And then if you look at Wyatt Johnston, every time I would say, all right, yeah, he's in this league, he's doing this, it'll slow down eventually. I mean, he just dominated his league. He, what was it, like 124 points in like 70 games or something crazy. Yeah. Then he goes and wins the Player of the Year. Then he goes and I think leads the playoffs in scoring. So he just dominated. And it looked, when I watched some of their games, it looked like he was on a different level. And those are the guys you have to find, not the ones that, everyone. It's easy to score a lot of goals in juniors. If you look at most prospects have scored a ton of goals in those leagues. That's why they're NHL draft picks. But he was just on a different level from that. So I think he's going to get a really good look. But I really believe that all three of those guys, even Strangis, even some of the defensemen, I think they're all going to get a look because the Stars have seen what the Jason Robertsons, Jake Oettingers, Rope Hintz, what they've turned into so quickly. They're like, hey, maybe we can sneak in another one of these guys, or even a Jacob Peterson, where it's like, okay, we were worried this 19-year-old wasn't going to be ready to make the NHL, and all of a sudden he's one of the most mature players on the team. And Peterson came in and played the first time he'd ever played on a smaller rink and was one of their better players in the entire preseason and early year. So if they can get someone like that from there, as you said earlier, on a dirt cheap contract that has really no downside because it's play 9 games, and if they're not in the lineup for 8 of them and consistently producing, send them back down and put in the more experienced guys. But I really believe that they're all going to get a look, and I've never been as excited to go to training camp as I have this year.
Yeah, I think this has the opportunity to be one of the more entertaining training camps to follow. It's not even really a problem, but just a great, issue to have, I guess, of all these kind of talented young players of who's going to make the cut and who's going to either go to juniors or maybe be down at the AHL with the Texas Stars, because guys are going to be quite literally fighting for their jobs and fighting for their NHL lives this season to compete with this Stars team that, like you said, is trying to not go to a rebuild. And see, by all the looks I can see, they're setting out to be a competitive team this season in a central division that will have the defending champion Colorado Avalanche and, of course, a ton of other teams like the Blues and the Wild who always play really competitive against the Stars. And kind of the last thing I want to touch on, we talk about the prospects that we have in the organization now, but with free agency and with the month of July also comes the NHL draft, which will be starting around this time next week. And I don't know how much you've looked into the prospects there. The Stars currently at the time of recording still have the 18th overall pick. Is there anyone that you have had your eye on, or do you just kind of have an idea of, okay, this is the type of player that the Stars need to go out and draft?
Kind of both. I think that they're looking at their depth. They kind of want to add some more defensemen. I don't think they have a lot more forwards than they do defensemen overall in the prospect pool. As we just talked about, everyone we name of their top guys are forwards. So if they could get a defenseman to join the ranks, especially with Harley now hopefully being an NHL guy, it would be beneficial for them to get someone. I know that I'm going to butcher every one of these names, by the way. It's just the way it is when it comes around draft time. But Lion Bischel, I think is how you say his name, or Bischel, from Switzerland. He's a really big, I think he's 6'5", 220. Apparently he's just growing too. They're worried that he was going to reach over 240 by the end of this year. So he's a big dude, but he can skate too. And he's what they call a play ender, which is what Hakanpää does, where the cycle's going all of a sudden and they just step in, pin him to the boards, plays over, they're breaking out the other way. And the Stars could use that. And they could use size. They've lost some size over the past years. They're not one of the bigger physical teams in the league. They brought in Hakanpää, which kind of replaced the Alexiak thing, but still, just any of these guys that the potential to be a Darnell Nurse was what people said about this guy. So that's someone they could take a shot at. He's actually projected to go possibly right before 18, maybe 16 or 17. But if he does fall there, that's a big one. And then the other guys, if they don't get a defenseman, the offensive guys that I looked at are Jonathan Lekkerimäki, who's a Swedish forward, and then Liam Ogren is also a Swedish forward. Both of those guys are kind of opposite roles. So Ogren is a playmaker. So the Stars have a lot of those in the system. So to me, it feels like they need goal scorers, guys that can just put the puck in the net. The Alex Ovechkin's, type of players, and that's what Lekkerimäki is for his team. So he's a little smaller. He's only 5'10", but he's a right-handed shot, which just seems to be plucking out of the air to find righties in this league nowadays.
Right.
But he can score goals along with again another crazy name, Ivan Miroshnichenko. Is a big name. I think he's been talked about a ton. He's had some health issues, and I think he had some Russian politic stuff when the Russian-Ukraine situation came in. But aside from that, he scores a ton of goals. He's another pure goal scorer. So I would like to see them get a defenseman, and if they can get Bischel early, I think that's great. If not, there are definitely some good forwards. It's always hard to tell who are these guys. Are they going to be really good potential outside of the top 10, or are they going to be people that kind of fade? But I think those guys, the pure goal scorers and then defensemen, are the kind of the ones that I have my eye on for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think getting if they can find a really nice defenseman in the middle of this first round, a guy that can, maybe they won't ever live up to the numbers or statistics of John Klingberg, but can potentially, fill that role in a few seasons if Klingberg does depart this summer. I think that could be really big for the franchise going forward. And it's always interesting with the NHL draft, just because, if you're not really in the lottery, but you're not at the very end, it's kind of a weird spot to be where, the Stars did good enough to make the postseason, but they didn't go very deep. But they also, by making the playoffs, did not find themselves in the lottery. So yeah, it's just an odd spot to be, but you never know when you're going to find those gems. And even late in the draft, you can go on and find guys that can change your franchise. I think Joe Pavelski was a 6th or 7th round pick for whenever he was drafted, and he went on and now been one of the best San Jose Sharks players and has been one of, if not the best Dallas Star since he joined the team a few seasons ago. So really exciting time in Dallas. Wedgwood has a new deal, and we're, of course, going to be keeping an eye on who else signs their extensions when. Oettinger and Robinson feels like it's coming pretty much any day now. Those are guys that I believe Jim Nill in the front office will want to build around, and I'm sure Pete DeBoer will be excited to have in his arsenal for this season. But Sam, thank you for coming on today's episode. If you'd like, you can take a moment and let the folks at home know where they can find some of your work.
Sure. Yeah. Just on Twitter, as always, at Sam Nestler. But I just actually recently started my own blog. It's called Written in the Stars. So writteninthestarshockey.com is where you can check out all my latest stuff. But Dane, thanks for having me, man. This is always fun.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode with Sam, friend of the show, guy who has contributed several times for several episodes. Always fun to get on and talk Dallas Stars hockey with him. Be sure to go check out his work. I'll have it linked down in the description below on YouTube, as well as on Spotify and Apple as well. But thank you guys for tuning in to today's episode of Locked On Stars, for making us your first listen of the day. Just a note and a announcement that we will not have an episode out on Monday, with it being the 4th of July. Just going to be taking a quick break, and then we will be back for the remainder of the week to talk all things NHL draft, probably do a few draft profiles, and just get ready to see what the Stars could be doing with that 18th overall pick, as well as with some of the other picks that they have in their back pocket for this draft. Hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. Stay safe, have fun, and we'll see you back here on Tuesday of next week.